to tell you what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like today. I can't tell you what we were like because I don't know what you were like. I don't want to talk about it. And I'll start probably from the time I was about 11. I was born to two alcoholics, and they were in the midst of doing their drinking stuff and what two married alcoholics do, on the verge of killing each other. And we found out my mother was pregnant. And prior to that, I'm going to talk about my relationship with God as a child, because I had a relationship. And I would run down this hill, and I would sing to Jesus and sing to God, and ice skate around this pond, and that was kind of just the place I went, in spite of the fact that my parents were alcoholic. And I assure you, I am not alcoholic because my parents were alcoholic. I'm my own alcoholic. And we found out my mom was pregnant. And at that point, I had decided God was crazy. Because I did not understand why God would give these two alcoholics another child. We already had 3. And we were struggling as it was. We'd have to hide under the beds or in the closet while they did their thing. And it was terrifying. My childhood was a terrifying place to be. And so she was born, and she was great. I was 11, I took care of her. My parents continued to be alcoholic and do their thing. And I had vowed I was never going to be like my parents. And it's a good thing I knew what alcoholics look like. Because I thought, I have a choice whether or not I'm going to be alcoholic. So, of course, I decided not to be alcoholic. And then I turned 17 years old, almost 18. And I started drinking a little bit in high school, blacked out, drank excessively. I think that's just what teenagers do, not for sure, but I wasn't the only one throwing up on the side of the road. My cousin was there with me, and we were arrested for drunken disorderly behavior. At least the officer threatened to arrest us. My dad had to come down to pick us up at the hospital, and he was arrested. So they didn't arrest us, they arrested him. There was a warrant out for his arrest for disorderly behavior somewhere. And so I thought, whatever you do, don't get arrested. Because even if someone comes to get you, that doesn't necessarily mean you're leaving, because they could get arrested. So my uncle had to come and get us. I stayed out of trouble because I figured, I can do the things I want to do without doing them illegally. So I didn't drink again until I was 18 because I was afraid to. And on my 18th birthday, I went out and I had 2 drinks because, go back a couple of years, when I was 15, my mother went into DePaul for treatment. She felt that, we needed help. So we were told to go to Al-Anon, and that's where I was introduced to the 12 steps. And I looked at steps 1, 2, 3. I was good with those steps, but when it came to the 4th step, searching in moral inventory, I'm like, I didn't do anything. They did. I don't need an inventory. I don't have a problem. They do. So that's where I was introduced to the 12 steps and Alcoholics Anonymous and all of this. I wasn't impressed, and so I went on to do my own thing, and which included at that point drinking as much as I wanted, whenever I wanted, because it was my life, and I have a right to do that, and I did. So that promise that I had made to myself that I was never going to be like them, I must have dismissed it, or I truly didn't feel that I drank like they did. I wasn't getting arrested, I wasn't getting into any trouble, I just drank a lot all the time. And I didn't even know why. I just did. It's what everybody did. The people I hung out with, that's what they did. And because I picked people who drank like I did. was not a coincidence. So I find a man, I meet a man at 20 years old, and he doesn't drink. He's been sober for 5 years. I was like, perfect. I'll marry him because one of us is going to drink, and it's going to be me. I wanted someone to be responsible, and I no longer wanted to be responsible. I was responsible from the time I was 11, taking care of my brothers and sisters, and I was finished with all that. I wanted to continue drinking. I wanted to move out of the house. I wanted someone to take care of me, and he seemed like a good candidate. So I married him. I was 20 years old. So if that doesn't prove that I'm crazy, I don't know what does. So we go on, and we're working, doing what we do, and I'm drinking excessively. And his boss referred to me as a barfly. Your wife's kind of a barfly, isn't she? And I was like, kind of offended. Like, what do you mean a barfly? Well, if you go out drinking every night, you're probably kind of a barfly. But again, I drank as much as I wanted, as long as I wanted. And when I was 26, so while I was with him, he wasn't drinking, but he was odd. And just because you're not drinking doesn't make you odd, but he couldn't hold a job. He had all kinds of, like they talk about in the book, great emotional mental disorders, and he was kind of neurotic. So I thought, maybe you should go to an AA meeting. My mom goes to AA meetings. My mom finally sobered up when I was like 23. She didn't sober up in 77. She continued to drink until 1984, right after I got married. And he had taken her to an AA meeting. And I thought, maybe you need an AA stuff. But he wouldn't go, so I went to Al-Anon. And I thought, maybe I need this Al-Anon stuff. So again, same 12 steps. So I looked at steps 1, 2, 3. Okay. Get to 4. Searching and fearless inventory. Nope. I don't have a problem. I don't have to take an inventory. I go out drinking at night and stay out all night, and I do what I want when I want. But in my book, that was still okay. I didn't lose my job. I was just drunk. Drank a lot, drank all the time. And in 1987, we were talking about getting baptized. I went to a church. I was starting to feel the effects of my alcoholism. And I went to a church with my mom. She was sober now. And I got baptized. And they wash away your sins, and then you're all back. So I was like, good. I have a lot of sins. This will help. I didn't have to do abortion, just get baptized. And I appreciated that. And my first thought leaving there was, I don't know what to do besides sin. I have this clean slate, and now I'm just going to mess it all up again. But I didn't know what to do, so I just continued to do what I did. And shortly thereafter, I got pregnant with my first child. And 9 months later, I had my baby. And for the first year of his life, I'm still drinking. I'm drinking heavily. I drank while I was pregnant with him. And I went out one night, July 9th, 1989, and I got home at like 5 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to take care of my son. My husband's going to go to work, and I'm not going to be able to take care of my son. And it dawned on me that I hadn't spent any time with my son for that first year of his life. But every weekend I was out drinking, doing what I do, and I had a revelation that I'm just like my mom and dad. I'm the person I never wanted to be. So I was in therapy, obviously. Everybody was in therapy in 1989. And I called my therapist and I said, I think I'm an alcoholic. And he said, okay, we'll get you into treatment. So I went into treatment and spent the next 26 days in treatment, getting drying up. And I came out of treatment and went to AA. My mother was in AA, and I loved AA. And I got a sponsor, and I worked the first 6 steps, and life was wonderful, for a minute. So So I ended up divorcing the first husband, marrying another husband, a guy in AA, and living my life. I didn't really change anything. I didn't drink, but I did what I wanted when I wanted. So that selfish, self-centered part of me was still there. And eventually, I became irritable, restless, and discontent, and I talk about it in the big book. Because I thought, you know what? If I don't drink, I'm going to become the woman I want to be. So I became meaner, more manipulative, more selfish, more everything. And it didn't feel good. It didn't feel good at all. My sister, the one who was born when I was 11, developed breast cancer. She had 3 children at that time, and she dies at the age of 29. And I hadn't made any connection with God during this time. I was sober without God, thank you very much, and happy about that. And then he takes her, and I was like, yeah, there you go again. There you go again, messing in my life. And I was mad at God. And the night of her funeral, I went out and I drank. And I wasn't drinking heavily because by that time I was 13 years sober, so I had a really strong connection in AA. I went to 3 meetings a week. I knew lots of people. I was sponsoring people, but I was still crazy. I had never really turned my life over. What I did is I stopped drinking and continued to operate on self-will. I wanted to do what I wanted to do what I wanted to do. And this program was going to turn me into a goody two-shoes. And honestly, I thought by turning my will over that I would have to stand on the corner and sell flowers. When it came to any type of spirituality, I had no understanding. So I had stopped drinking and went to meetings for a very long time. And my husband was doing drugs at that time, so we were drinking, doing drugs, and it was horrible. It was horrible. It was worse than when I had stopped drinking in 1989. And so on January 1st, 2004, we had gone out. No, we didn't go out. We were at home, and he brought home cocaine. And I was like, well, if you're going to do that, I'm going to do that. So I did it. And then I was never really a drug user. And apparently, when you use cocaine, you should have alcohol. And I didn't have any alcohol. And it was a horrible experience. And the next day, I vowed that I'm done. I'm done drinking. I'm done doing drugs. I'm done doing all this monkey business. I'll go back to just not drinking and going to meetings. And that's what I did. I wasn't happy, but at least I wasn't hungover. And then I thought, well, maybe that's as good as it gets. I had learned enough in the meetings, reading how it works. And there's a solution. There's a whole chapter on there's a solution. And I was like, there's a solution, and I don't know the solution. Somehow I'm still irritable, restless, discontent, and absolutely miserable. I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous for 20 years, and it's as good as it gets. It's as good as it gets. And my husband's still using drugs, and now my son's using drugs, and so what do? You send them to Alcoholics Anonymous, right? You need to go to AA. So he goes to AA, and he comes home from the meeting and goes, you aren't doing any of the stuff in that book. What do you mean? You're not doing that. And you're taking pills, because we have to run all types of, clonazepam and Valium and whatever, you can get prescribed. So now we're on prescription drugs, we're gambling, we're up to all kinds of monkey business, but hey, I'm not drinking and I don't want to eat. I'm $40,000 in debt and in a whole bunch of trouble. We're on the verge of losing our house. And the pressure, the stress is just unbelievable. We're fighting all the time. And, we walk in the room, the kids get out of the room. It's like, oh my God, I turned into my mom and dad without alcohol. This is, how can you even do that? And I managed to do that because I didn't know what alcoholism was. And I went to a meeting, and my husband was like, yeah, I saw Bill the other day. And he kept talking about this guy named Bill. I'm like, who's Bill? Well, I used to work with Bill. I worked, go to AA with Bill. He's got a solution. And I'm like, well, then why don't we go see Bill? If he knows what this solution is, and there is a solution, we need to talk to somebody who has a solution. So we went to this meeting, the How It Works group, and they were talking about having a solution, and you never have to drink again, and being free from the bondage of self. And these are things I've never heard at a meeting before. When I went to a meeting, we'd sit there and we'd talk about what went on in our day, what's going on in our lives, and I call them piss and moan meetings, because that's where we'd go, so here, I have a problem, put them here, share your problems, and leave them there, take what you want and leave the rest. And somehow I always left with all the garbage or something, because this wasn't working for me. And now I'm 6 years sober again. I've been around for 20 years, and I'm like, I'm not gonna make it another 13 years. That's not gonna happen. I am not happy. He's not staying sober. He's going off the rails. And a few years before that, my father had killed his wife, his second wife, not my mother. And he was in prison, so I had all this chaos and insanity around me. And I felt like I was going to explode. And I'm angry, I'm mean, I'm so mean. And so we go to this meeting, and we're talking about freedom from the bondage of self. And back then, I had memorized how it works. Wherever we have seen a person fail, he must thoroughly follow their path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not recover. And that made nothing to me. I could repeat it, but I didn't understand it. And then things started to click. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. And I was like, what path? There's a path? And what I began to realize is what I don't know. First of all, I haven't found the solution that they have a whole chapter on. I really didn't even know what made me an alcoholic. I thought I was an alcoholic because when I went to the ball, they told me I was an alcoholic. Well, yeah, I'm an alcoholic. So I go to this meeting, this guy's talking about why settle for the scraps when there's a banquet. And I'm like, really? There's a banquet. So my husband's asked him to be his sponsor, and they're working the steps. And I walk into the kitchen. My husband and I fought like my mom and dad. Very turbulent. And I walked in the kitchen one time, and I'm really angry. And typically, if I walked in the kitchen and I'm angry, he would become angry. For no particular reason, to share in my anger. So I walk in the kitchen, and I'm angry, and I tell him whatever was bothering me. He says, what can I do to help? And I was like, wow. And I had nothing. Because what could he do to help? But that was the first time anybody had ever asked me that. Kind of stopped me in my tracks. And I realized he was changing. Something was going on with him. So I asked this guy, I'm like, he's going to get sober without me. He ain't leaving me behind. And I asked this man to sponsor me also. And we started working the steps. And for the first time, someone actually qualified me and said, what makes you an alcoholic? No one ever asked me any questions before either. And I never asked anybody else any questions because I didn't know we could. And I said, well, when I start drinking, I can't stop. He said, that's it. That's it? I didn't know that didn't happen to other people. I didn't know that when I was drinking with my sister, that the reason I had to finish her drink is because something happened inside of me when I drank. And it didn't happen to her. And that's what made her a crappy drinker. And that's what made her not a good person to go out drinking. Unless you want to drink someone else's drinks. Yeah. And but I like to be with other people who are drinking like me, otherwise I'm self-conscious. I like drinking with other alcoholics or heavy drinkers. The teetotalers, no. And so that's step one, Then he asked me about my beliefs in God, and then the third step, God couldn't would if he were sought. How do you seek God? Another question. It used to bother me that he asked these questions, but I didn't know the answers. And he said, by working the rest of the steps. So together we worked the rest of the steps. I did a 4-step. Again, I had done a number of 4 steps with other people, and we could all, the other people that ever sponsored me had only gotten to the 6th step themselves. I was finally able to work with somebody who could get me past the 6th step, out of the problem. The first 6 steps addressed the problem. 7 through 12 addressed the solution. And that's why I didn't have a solution, because I had never worked the rest of the steps. I thought I did, but we had breezed over them in a way that was not sufficient and didn't bring on permanent sobriety, obviously, because I didn't stay permanently sober. And I was still irritable, restless, and discontent. But at this point, I worked the steps, and I began to feel some relief. And I'm willing to do something different. I'm willing to live by spiritual principles, even though I didn't have a good idea what spiritual principles were. And they're very simple: kind, considerate, patient, tolerant, loving, and understanding. And then the 12 and 12, it talks about it, that am I working these just to show good character? Am I willing to work these, Ray? Page 71, 12 and 12? Okay.
Character building.
Character building. The character building was lost if I became uncomfortable. I'm just going to summarize it. So instead of building character, when it came down to it, if it was uncomfortable, I wasn't going to do it. You know? I wasn't going to embarrass myself. I wasn't going to look stupid. Because I thought humility was like humiliation. You know, because I came up from the school of nice guys finish last. So if you're a nice person, I thought you were a loser. And I didn't want to be a loser. And people take advantage of you if you're a nice person. And I didn't know that you could be a nice person and not be taken advantage of. So I learned these things, and I learned that I have to practice these principles in all my affairs, all of the time, not just when it's convenient to me. And that may sound obvious, but I began practicing these principles. My 3rd step this time was solid. I had turned my life in my will over because I was so sick of me. I couldn't stand me. So today, you know, I continue to work the 12 steps. I continue to live by this. My husband committed suicide 6 years ago. And I remember looking at him on the floor thinking to myself, make good choices. Because whenever anything bad, painful, uncomfortable would happen, I would resort back to bad behaviors. I would seek something that would comfort me. Not even necessarily drugs and alcohol anymore. Whether it's gambling, shopping, and in the big book it talks about that we can continue on to the bitter end, looking for ways to relieve ourselves or accept spiritual help. So at that point, I had decided, you know, I turned my life over. I didn't really want to continue. I was devastated by what had happened, but had made a decision that God has a better life for me, whatever it is. I was finished telling God what to do, more or less. You know, when my sister was born, I was mad at God. When my dad shot my stepmom, I was mad at God. I thought he could stop that bullet. You know, and I didn't understand self-will, that people had self-will. And people continue to have self-will. And that doesn't have to affect me in a way where I have to use drugs and alcohol or, you know, go off the deep end and cause harm to myself. Because that's what my alcoholism does. It asks me to hurt me. And that's insane. That's the insanity that I was restored from. I don't have to continue hurting today. I don't have to be my parents. I don't have to be, you know, my sponsor. I don't have to be the people I sponsor or my boss. I can just be me. I have my relationship with God, and I have a good life. I continued after my husband died for the first time in my life since I was 20, because I divorced one guy and married another one. So for the first time in my life, I was single, and I was in my 50s. and I had a part-time job. And I ended up leaving that job, getting a full-time job, selling my house, buying an income property, making rational decisions. And that's something that I didn't know how to do before, was make rational decisions. I made decisions from fear. I was fear-based. I was afraid of everybody and everything. I was afraid of losing my job. I was afraid of losing my relationship. I was afraid of losing my children. I was afraid of losing everything that I had and not getting what I want. And the 12-12 talks about this. We have two fears. Fears of losing what we have or not getting what we want. And that's how I operated in life. Trying to hang on to or grab what I didn't have in pursuit of unfulfilled wants. So, yeah. And now because I didn't do that, I'll be celebrating 20 years of sobriety, and I'm really excited about that. For the first time, I really like my sobriety. I ended up meeting a man that I'm with today. So I have a new relationship. I have everything I could ask for. My son just got married. He's sober. And that was hard. Being sober, watching someone you love be in the throes of this addiction. And at that point, you have to say, thy will be done. That was between him and his God. And this is between me and my God. And I'm grateful that he has a relationship with God today, and he's married, and my daughter's pregnant. And I'm so glad I'm still here. Back in the day when I first got here, I was your age. And I looked at those old people at the table, and I was like, dear God. Who wants long-term sobriety? Because it looks like that. It may not look as good as it feels. That's all I have to say. They talk about a design for living, and it's great. Don't settle for the scraps when there's a banquet. Most people won't do it. Rarely have we've seen a person fail who's thoroughly followed our path, like most won't. And with that, I'll pass.